Pitching coach Jeremy Hefner thinks we'll see a much better Spencer Strider in 2026. Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today, your source for news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on social media at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on X Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram as well. And you can find all of my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. Proudly part of the Believe Podcast Network and presented to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app or go to FanDuel.com to get started. I want to talk about Bryce Elder a little bit later in the show. He's not the X factor for the rotation, but he's probably the only pitcher Atlanta has without injury concerns. Led the team in innings last year. Really curious to find out, where does he end up in 2026? I've got some thoughts about what he needs to do if he wants to stick in the rotation. But before we do that, new pitching coach Jeremy Hefner went on SiriusXM Radio's MLB Network Radio with CJ Nikowski, friend of the show, Braves broadcaster with FanDuel Sports Network, and former MLB player Ryan Spilborough. And they talked to Hefner, wide-ranging conversation about why he joined Atlanta, what it was like leaving the Mets, thoughts about the team, the roster, Spencer Strider specifically, how he learned the guys and all of that stuff. I got a couple clips to play for you. He had some interesting thoughts on Spencer Strider, and they should make you feel really good about what his 2026 is going to look like. But before we do that, I thought it was interesting. He talked about how a bunch of teams called him almost right away when he left New York, and how, like, it was his first time actually being a free agent, right? He had a Twins job when he took the promotion to go to New York. His first time really being a free agent, and how the philosophy of the Braves, what Alex Anthopoulos wanted to do with the pitching staff, really was appealing to Jeremy Hefner. But he also talked about why he wanted to come to Atlanta in the first place. And I think it's important for us to hear it briefly, just to kind of remember the reputation, the good reputation this organization has in the game. Here's Jeremy Hefner on MLB Network Radio talking about his thoughts from the outside of the Atlanta Braves.
I was always impressed with Braves pitchers, even going back to my playing days in the early 2010s. There was a certain level of confidence and good body language, attack mentality. They're always on top of you. And I think that's recently that's Chris Sale, right? Like he's the main player, the main dog, the future Hall of Famer. And everyone kind of revolves around him, and like he just gets after it. And you can see that impression on Strider. You can see that impression on Schwellenbach. You can see that impression on Lopez, and even in the bullpen with Dylan Lee and Iggy, and now we have Robert Suarez. Like you have a lot of guys that throw a lot of strikes, that have swing and miss stuff, that get after people, and that's the thing that I've appreciated about the Braves.
Yeah, he's very positive on just like the Braves. It's a pitching staff that is trying to attack you. They're trying to strike you out. And there is a stylistic difference in some pitching staffs, right? The St. Louis Cardinals have been characterized for a long time, and they're struggling right now to shift from it. For the longest time, they were characterized by our pitchers focused on getting ground balls, weak contact, letting you put the ball in play, and then our defense would clean it up. And with the shift restrictions that came in, it wasn't directly correlated to that, but I don't think it's coincidence that they've not been the same team since that happened and some of their veteran core aged out, right? Brandon Crawford, and just to clarify, Brandon Crawford's a joke. I know he was on there for 1 year, but like Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado's in the backside of his career, Yadier Molina, like all those guys, right? And so the Braves, by contrast, are the other type of pitching staff that they're coming after you. They got swing and miss stuff. They're getting strikeouts. And their goal is for you to not put the ball into play. Now, there's pros and cons with that approach, right? It is harder to go deeper into a game when you are striking everybody out, because usually those at-bats are longer than when you're able to get weak contact and get a ground ball early in the at-bat. So there are trade-offs. Your bullpen is more important if you are a strikeout team versus a pitch to contact ground ball team. You can go back and you can look at the 2024 season when it comes to pitching. Atlanta, they were the best in ERA at 3.49. When you look at strikeouts, they led baseball in strikeouts as a pitching staff with 1,553. There was only one other team that even got to 1,500 strikeouts. Like, we've seen this model work for the Braves. Swing and miss stuff, backed by a really good bullpen. It's very clear Hefner thinks they can get back there. And I do think a big part of getting back there and that mentality is going to be getting Spencer Strider back into his prime form. 2023 was obviously the best season of his career. He led Major League Baseball in wins with 20, in winning percentage at 800, but also strikeouts at 281, which was a team record. He beat John Smoltz's record. Strikeouts per 9 innings with 13.5, and led the NL in fielding independent pitching at a 285. His actual ERA was 386. He had a little bit of some home run luck and things like that. But he finished 4th place in Cy Young voting for a reason. Strikeout rate of 36.8%. Just absurd, right? Last year, that was down from 36.8% to 24.3%. His walks were also up by 2%. His exit velocity allowed was up by 2 miles an hour. His hard hit rate was up by 6.5%. A bunch of things did not go as well for Spencer Strider. And the number one thing that we've all been kind of pointing to has been his velocity, right? In 2023, working entirely as a starter, right? If you remember 22, he started off in the bullpen and moved into the rotation. In 23, working entirely as a starter, Spencer Strider averaged 97.2 miles an hour on his four-seam fastball. This year, 95.5. And there were points earlier in the season where he wasn't even touching 97. Never mind averaging 97 for the season. We've also talked on the show before about issues with induced vertical break and all of that stuff. And so, a lot for Strider to fix. Well, CJ Nikowski, our resident pitching expert on the broadcast, asked Hefner specifically about Spencer Strider towards the end of the segment. Wanted to know more about what the problem was and did they think they could fix it. So the two voices you'll hear, CJ's the first voice, Hefner is the second. Again, the audio is from MLB Network Radio in the middle of last week.
I just want to ask you real quickly on Spencer Strider and kind of watching in the last couple of years, coming back from injury, velocity was down a couple of ticks for him. It's still good, but it was down a couple of ticks. But the bigger conversation was the induced vertical break on the four-seam fastball had kind of come down for him. And I'm just curious in regards to when you're trying to recapture some of that. How much of it is teachable? How much is it maybe making an adjustment because it's hard to get that kind of thing back? What can you tell us about induced vertical break on a fastball and trying to create it for guys that either have lost it or maybe never had it?
And I'm pausing real quick. The context here, in 2023, that great season, Strider was at 18.4 inches induced vertical break, which is how much the ball moves relation to how much it should move because of gravity, okay? So 18.4 inches is an elite number. MLB average is around 16 inches. He had 18.4 inches, which means fastballs up in the zone don't drop to the hitter as much as the hitter thinks they should, and they swing underneath it. Again, he's throwing 97, 18 inches of induced vertical break. Last year, he's averaging 95 with 16 inches of vertical break, and there were good stretches where he was under that. He was at 15 inches below average amounts of induced vertical break at a lower velocity. Okay, so CJ's asking, how do you fix that? What's the cost? How do you fix that? Here's Jeremy Hefner's answer.
Yeah. So it's usually a couple things. It's usually like arm angle, like how they're throwing the baseball, or grip, or some combination of both. And that can also be like delivery related, like more upstream, like how they're loading, all those things. Like all those things kind of play into it. It could be some sort of external cue where how they're thinking about throwing the baseball could be a little bit off. But I think in Spence's case, it was more arm angle, and he lost a little bit of the slot, like it came down a little bit. So he's kind of cross firing, and so the ball wasn't spinning the same way it was pre-Tommy John. And so I think it's absolutely something that we can get back, and he's working his butt off to get there. And I think we'll see a better Strider in 26 than he was in 25.
Let's use their music cue. We're going to go to break. When we come back, I'm going to tell you about what crossfiring means and the details on that arm angle drop that Hefner discussed. We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby. Okay, so the two things that Jeremy Hefner mentioned there were crossfiring and the arm angle. Now, the arm angle stuff is really easy to kind of see on StatCast. Makes a lot of sense. Spencer Strider's arm angle has typically been somewhere between 49 and 48 degrees or so. And, it's a little bit above three, it's a higher slot, right? A high 3/4 slot. And last season, it dropped all the way to 42 degrees. And those of you who remember us talking about Chris Sale's issues earlier in the year, Chris Sale had arm slot issues. And what that caused for him were his pitches were not spinning the same way, and his accuracy was impacted. When you look at Strider, it's a very similar situation as far as he had less induced vertical break, but he had more, and he also had different amounts of horizontal movement, more horizontal movement on his fastball. Because again, when your arm angle drops, the same flight of the ball is going to naturally move more side to side and less vertically because you're throwing from a lower arm angle. So in 23, at that higher arm angle, that 48 degrees, Spencer Strider had 18.4 inches of induced vertical break. So again, it looks like it breaks less than it should because of gravity, okay? And his pitches on average moved 6 inches to the arm side. His fastballs moved 6 inches to the arm side. Last year, he went from 18.4 inches of induced vertical break to 16.4. So he lost 2 inches of induced vertical break. And we saw an even bigger change in the arm side movement. He went from 6 inches in 2023 to 8.9 in 2025. And this actually had the effect of making his horizontal movement on his four-seam fastball, taking it from below average to above average. The average MLB fastball on horizontal movement sits around 7.5 inches of movement. He had 8.9. So it was above average. But he doesn't use the four-seam fastball that way. He uses it up in the zone to get whiffs from a vertical perspective. And then the slider, throwing the slider off of that, it drops below the zone. Like it's a north and south kind of thing that he's doing. Contrast that to Chris Sale, who throws sidearm, and all of his stuff is an east to west thing. He's not beating you with fastballs up in the zone. He's beating you with sliders that run off the plate and a lot of that stuff. So Strider's arm angle dropped, but not in a way that helped the way he was using these pitches. It added horizontal movement and took away drop. And in his case, he wants the vertical movement and does not want the horizontal movement. So that can lead to, obviously, the pitches being more hittable, but also some accuracy issues. And the crossfire thing's another part of that. So, and I'm going to ask you, if you're driving, don't do this. But if you're like at home or something, or you're in the office and nobody's watching, if you stand up and you picture a pitching rubber behind your back foot, okay? Stand however you would normally stand to throw a baseball. I'm a lefty, so my left foot's on the pitching rubber. But if you stride directly forward off of the pitching rubber, okay, think of the pitching mound as a clock, and your back foot is at 6 o'clock, and the plate is at 12 o'clock. Spencer Strider's normal motion of that front foot is directly towards the plate. But when you crossfire, your front foot does not go directly towards the plate. It actually goes to the side. And so what happens, and like for a righty, I have to mentally swap here. For a righty, it actually, instead of going to 12 o'clock, try to make sure I do this right. It's so unnatural. For a righty, it's like going to 1 or 2 o'clock. For a lefty, it's like going to 10 or 11 o'clock. And what that means is now your hips and your shoulder are not effectively translating everything. Velocity in a baseball pitch, on a fastball, starts in your legs, your feet, your legs, and it goes up through your waist, your core, your back, into your shoulder, into your elbow, into your hand, and out the ball. It's called a kinetic chain. Starts at the ground, and in sequence goes all the way up into your arm and out the baseball. When you're cross-firing, unless you're doing it on purpose, Chris Sale does it on purpose, different situation. Unless you're doing it on purpose, it means that your shoulders and hips end up having to kind of come through at the same time. You're having to do extra movement to open your shoulders towards the plate. And so you're not as efficiently translating all of the power your legs are generating into the baseball. Because if your hips and your shoulders are firing at the same time, then reasonably there's some momentum, there's some kinetic energy that's not getting from the hips to the shoulders. Because normally your shoulders would fire a fraction of a second after the hips. Everything works in order. And when you're cross-firing, when you're closed off and your body has to move quicker, you're just not getting as efficient a delivery from a kinetic standpoint. That affects your velocity. And then now you're also in a situation where you're not lined up directly towards the plate. And so your target ends up being off and your accuracy is impacted. Now again, some pitchers like Chris Sale, who's a sidearm guy, do this on purpose. That's a different situation. But a guy like Strider, think about 2023 Spencer Strider and how he would strike a guy out and would pretty much spin on his back foot, on his front foot as he followed through. He was so perfectly balanced left and right, forward and backwards, that he could do that. You didn't see a lot of that in 2025 because he wasn't balanced. He was offset because he was cross-firing. He didn't have that same balance side to side because of the crossfire. It impacted his velocity, it impacted his locations, and then the pitch movement could have partially been that. It's a different angle from the arm to the plate now. Or it could have just been the grip, the velocity change, a lot of different things. The good news here is, the point that I'm trying to make, is Jeremy Hefner already knows what happened. And Spencer Strider has been working on fixing it this winter. We don't know what Spencer's been doing, right? This is not public information. We're not in Maven Baseball Lab or wherever Spencer is. But according to Jeremy Hefner, they're all aware of what happened. And Spencer's been working to fix it. And it makes me feel really good about the potential for Atlanta in 2026 to get better results out of guys like Spencer Strider than they did last year. In just a minute, let's talk about what Hefner said about how he gets those results out of his new players. How does he learn a new player and get to the point where he can implement changes? And specifically, what do those changes need to look like for Bryce Elder? We'll do that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Bowl season's been incredibly entertaining. I feel like I talked about some of these on the show and I've kind of gotten them a little bit wrong. But either way, there's more really fun props up now for MLB next season. Aaron Judge, over or under 50.5 home runs. Shohei Ohtani, over or under 49.5. And that's exactly even money. So people are, as of right now, 49 or 50 is what they're kind of thinking there. Pete Alonso, over or under 37.5 in Baltimore. Surprisingly low number. You can get all of that action, World Series, league winners, all of that kind of stuff over on FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Final segment of Braves Today, Lindsay Crosby. And I want to talk about what Jeremy Hefner said about learning these guys in general, okay? Because this is he's changing teams, and there's a lot of guys to learn. This is a little bit of a longer clip. I apologize in advance. But you're going to hear Hefner talk briefly about what he does. You're going to hear a question from Ryan Spilborough, the co-host with CJ Nikowski, about the influence of technology and how Hefner does it. And then Hefner's going to come back in with details and a time frame of when they expect to make some of these changes. Again, all this audio is from MLB Network Radio. Thanks to SiriusXM for allowing us to use this.
I'm kind of re-energized in a lot of ways because usually when you go into an off season and you've been with a club, you get free agents or you get some non-roster invitees to camp. And so you have, 6 or 7 or 10 guys or how many ever to kind of comb through. Well, now I have like 25 guys to comb through and try to get to know and understand. And if we're going to make adjustments, be able to relay that information appropriately. And so that part of it's been a lot of work, but it's also been a lot of fun too, to get to know some new guys.
Are you going to spend some time with, so many of these pitchers are in labs right now working on a new pitch. And that's a lot of new pitchers that you're going to have to try to put a thumbprint on, or at least, build that relationship. How are you going to do that? How are you planning on doing that in the off season?
Yeah, well, I have a really good bullpen coach in JP Martinez, who spent quite a bit of time in San Francisco in various roles. And then we worked together in Minnesota. He was a coordinator, and I was helping the big league staff. And so we go back a little ways, and so he helps me out a ton. And then as well as the people that surround us, the supporting staff. Kind of, to use a football analogy, they get me to like the 40 or the 30 or the 20 going in. And then I just, have conversations, and then me and the player get it into the end zone. So I have a lot of people that are helping me do the legwork and try to understand kind of the Braves system and how things have kind of been ran, and then not to come in and like flip tables, but like where can we get better? Where were the Braves already excelling and not get in the way of that? And for me, that's best practices. And it's a lot of conversation. It's a lot of work, but I feel like if we take this time where it's cold and we're just kind of sitting around, like we have those conversations after a guy throws a bullpen, because some of the guys are starting to throw bullpens. Definitely after the calendar flips, we'll start having a lot more bullpens, and we can have, those baseball conversations, whether we're working on a grip or a pitch type or some sort of delivery cue. We can talk through those things and not wait until spring training and feel like, hi, I'm Jeremy Hefner. I'm the new pitching coach. What are you working on February 15th? Like, we've already had those conversations back in November. And so like once we get to spring training, it's just a continuation of what we've been working on. And now we get to face hitters and we're all together and it's, gearing up for the season. And I feel like that's how you get the most out of guys. And try to utilize everyone's time appropriately and respectfully.
Yeah, so it's a lot of the work has already been happening. And it really, to me, the impression that I got from this is that a lot of this first offseason is Jeremy Hefner getting to know them and finding out what they're working on, what they're going into the offseason wanting to do. And then after the first of the year, when they really start ramping up the game-specific work, right? Like you can be throwing new pitches and things like that, but you're not doing your standard bullpens and everything until, after the first of the year. That's when Hefner's going to kind of interject into that to have the conversations and to see their progress, and then they can measure the progress against hitters in February. So for those of you who were concerned that we wouldn't get a lot of, there wouldn't be a lot of time to implement changes, it does feel like while this won't be an incredibly transformative offseason, there are opportunities for Hefner to still have a voice in the changes that some of these guys make this winter. Next winter is probably when you see the massive, well, I say the massive changes, but we probably have a lockout. And so they won't be able to coaches and players cannot interact during a lockout. So that's the only downside here is, and probably part of the reason he tried to accelerate this winter is the fact that they won't be able to do it next winter. But I do love the fact they're already working on that. And one guy I'm specifically curious about is Bryce Elder. Now, for those of you who are subscribed to both the podcast and the newsletter, I dropped almost 2,400 words on Bryce Elder on Monday morning. But the gist of this is he is more valuable than a lot of the casual fans appreciate because of the innings. He is fourth on innings in the Braves the last 4 years. And he led the team last year. He has the most innings across the last 3 seasons. I'm sorry, it was last 5 years that he's top 4. And last 3, he's number 1 in innings. But there's things that he needs to change. His velocity's gotten better, right? He went from averaging 90 miles an hour when he debuted to averaging almost 93 on the four-seamer last year. 4 of his 6 hardest pitches in his career were in late September of last season in the same outing against Washington. So, he was able to give you a lot of quality outings, right? He had 8 quality starts his last 11 outings in 2025. But I went back and looked at some of the non-quality outings, and there are some issues that came up. His pitch movement has gotten worse. And the slider traded a little vertical drop. Sorry, the sinker traded a little vertical drop for arm side movement. It's fine. It's not a big deal one way or the other. The slider has lost a good amount of drop in exchange for a little bit of horizontal movement. But it's now a worse pitch. It had outlier vertical drop on it, and now it's like average. And his locations have drifted up into the middle of the zone. Middle in, middle, and middle away, right? All in the strike zone there. And he's getting crushed on those pitches. So he's throwing them more often, and he's getting worse results. And part of me thinks that the movement is attached to the location issue, right? Because the slider's getting less drop. When he throws it, and it's going to end up middle, the old slider of 2023 that had a couple more inches of drop is going to drop to the bottom third of the zone, but this slider isn't. So part of my hope here, and again, was 2,300, 2,400 words over the newsletter, but my hope here on Bryce Elder is that Jeremy Hefner is working with him, one, to figure out why the movement got worse on those pitches. It's not the arm angle. It could be the velocity, but even that feels a little weird. And then working with him on some more pitches. Obviously, you guys know me. The joke is give him a cutter. He did throw one cutter in 2024. He got a ground out of William Contreras on one. But I do think because he's so dependent on his locations, and he does a pretty good job, believe it or not, of hitting his locations. But the fact the pitches don't move as much as they used to means he doesn't get lucky when he misses a location and the pitch movement takes it out of there. The Tampa Bay Rays, for the longest time, their catchers were told to set up middle on every pitch because all of their guys had such good movement on their curveballs and sliders and sweepers and everything that nothing would end up in the middle of the plate. The natural movement of the pitch would take it out of the middle of the plate every time. Bryce Elder, because his movement is diminished, doesn't get that. He's dependent on his locations being down. Yes, give him a cutter. When the sinker's not on, the cutter can bridge between the four-seamer and the slider. Great. I want to see him add some sort of curveball. I don't know what it would look like. Is it a 12-6? Is it a slurve? I worry that maybe the slurve would eat away from the slider a little bit. That's always a concern. I'm tempted because he's not great at spinning the ball, right? So his spin rates are on the lower side for the pitches that he throws, especially the fastballs. Maybe like a knuckle curve that's not reliant on the spin for the movement. I just think that something with more vertical drop and another velocity change would give him more margin of error to survive if he misses a location, and would give him another breaking pitch when his slider's not on that day. I do think there's also an adjustment you can make when it comes to his rest. If you go back and you look last year, what he did on days of rest. And I have the slash lines for opposing hitters. 4 days of rest, 250, 308, 399. Not amazing, but not terrible, right? 5 days of rest, 263, 333, 446. Everything goes up, batting average by 13 points, on base by 25, slugging by almost 50 points. 6 days or more of rest, 320 average, 371 on base, 536 slug. I remember Joe Simpson telling me in the press box one time that sinker ballers are best when they're a little bit fatigued. And I'm not saying he's automatically right or wrong. I've not done the math on this. But at first glance, looking at what opposing hitters did off of Elder's stuff based on days of rest, you feel like it might have a point. You feel like there might be a point there. So, since you have guys that you want to monitor the workload on, right? Whether it's Ronaldo Lopez, you want your postseason guys to get to the postseason healthy. So if you can skip a start here and there, push them back here and there, a Sale, a Schwellenbach, a Lopez, a Strider, whatever, Elder's that guy you can keep him on schedule every fifth day and then move everybody else around, right? You can maybe skip somebody and push them back a day and move Elder up a day so that Elder doesn't have extra rest because of an off day, but that other guy gets extra rest because of the off day. Because we've seen, based on that limited results from last season, that Elder does better on regular rest than extra days of rest. And since we're not counting on him to start games in the postseason, fingers crossed, hopefully, getting him as many starts as possible in the regular season is fine because we are not as concerned about his availability for October as we are a Sale, a Strider, a Schwellenbach, a Lopez, right? So I'm really curious to see what Jeremy Hefner does with Bryce Elder. I do genuinely understand the value of the innings Bryce Elder can give. When he's on, he's a very good pitcher. We saw the first half of 23. He was an all-star. Last year, he had 8 quality starts in the last 11 outings, and I believe he finished with 14 quality starts last year. When he's on, he's good. When he's not on, he's bad. And if we can raise that floor a little bit on those bad outings, maybe we have an ideal number 5 starter who can take the ball every fifth day, get you to October, where your studs can then shine. This has been Braves Today for Monday, December 29th. Do me a favor. Listening on audio, a 5-star review would be fantastic. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, maybe also leave a 5-star review. That'd be great. And always, subscriptions over at BravesToday.com help us out a ton. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.